The moment Oprah's smile froze, and millions of viewers knew something historic was happening. It began like any other high-profile interview. The cameras swept across the studio, the lighting perfect, the audience hushed with reverence. Oprah Winfrey sat poised in her signature chair, radiating confidence. She leaned forward, her voice smooth, measured, rehearsed. She pressed Jasmine Crockett with a question that wasn't a question at all. It was a verdict, a framing of the young congresswoman as impulsive, unpolished, out of her depth. "Do you really think," Oprah asked, her tone dripping with authority, "that your kind of passion belongs in leadership? Or is it just noise?" The air tightened. The crowd gave a polite, nervous chuckle, the kind people give when they're unsure if they're witnessing entertainment or humiliation. Oprah waited for Crockett to stumble. This was the script Oprah had followed for decades: position herself as the wise guide, reduce her guest to a story arc she could control, and bask in the glow of dominance. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't smile nervously. She didn't rush to appease. She let the silence stretch until the weight of Oprah's words pressed back on the very woman who had delivered them. Then, with piercing calm, Crockett answered. "Standing up for people who've been ignored is just noise," she said. "Then maybe America needs more noise. And fewer voices telling us to sit down and be quiet." The audience erupted, not with laughter but with an audible gasp, followed by scattered applause. The camera cut back to Oprah, and for the first time in decades of carefully managed interviews, her composure cracked. Her practiced smile faltered. Her eyes flickered, surprise, disbelief, something she hadn't felt on her own stage in a very long time, loss of control. That was the instant social media would later loop in millions of clips. The queen of talk shows, speechless. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply sat there, shoulders squared, gaze unwavering, embodying the very dignity Oprah had tried to strip away. And yet, as powerful as that single exchange was, it was nothing compared to what came next, because what unfolded after that opening salvo would leave Oprah not only rattled, but stunned beyond words. Oprah hadn't invited Jasmine Crockett onto her stage by accident. This wasn't a casual conversation, nor a generous hand extended to an up-and-coming voice in American politics. No, Oprah had a plan. She wanted to remind the nation, and perhaps herself, that she was still the cultural compass, still the arbiter of who was worthy of being taken seriously. Crockett was framed not as an equal, but as a curiosity, the fiery young congresswoman who stirred headlines with unfiltered words and unapologetic conviction. For Oprah, this was supposed to be a teachable moment, a chance to temper the so-called radical edge of a woman who refused to play by the old rules. The cameras were meant to capture Oprah's guiding hand, the authority figure gently, but firmly reshaping Crockett's passion into something more palatable for the mainstream. It was the oldest play in the book, the establishment absorbing and softening the new. But what made this moment extraordinary wasn't just the clash of two women. It was the clash of eras. Oprah represented a generation that had carved space by carefully navigating the boundaries of respectability, by speaking truth softly enough that power didn't flinch. Crockett embodied the next wave, voices unwilling to whisper, voices that carried the fire of communities long silenced, voices that believed respectability had too often been used as a leash. This wasn't just about two chairs on a stage. It was about two Americas staring each other down, one rooted in the belief that progress comes from patience, decorum, and slow persuasion, the other certain that patience had been weaponized, that silence had cost lives, that truth spoken loudly was the only way forward. And that is why the stakes were so high. Millions tuned in expecting another polished Oprah moment, maybe even a gentle scolding of a brash newcomer. But what they got instead was something raw, unscripted, dangerous to the status quo. Because Crockett wasn't there to be managed. She wasn't there to bow. She was there to stand, to remind every immigrant family, every working-class voice, every underestimated woman that their fire belonged in the halls of power, not hidden in the shadows. When Crockett turned Oprah's question back on her, when she dared to define noise as the sound of America demanding justice, the balance of power in that room shifted. Suddenly, Oprah wasn't the mentor, she was the challenger. Crockett wasn't the student, she was the mirror held up to decades of compromise. Viewers at home felt it in their bones. The hashtags forming on Twitter weren't about admiration for Oprah's control, they were about shock at her unraveling. Clips spread with captions like, "Did Jasmine Crockett just check Oprah on her own show?" and "The Queen just got dethroned. Live." Yet as stunning as that first exchange was, it was still only the surface of what was coming. Because the real drama wasn't just in Crockett's defiance, but in the way she would dismantle, piece by piece, the very narrative Oprah thought she controlled. Viewers had no idea that this interview was about to flip the script on everything they thought they knew about Oprah's dominance. What began as a test for Crockett was about to turn into a revelation, not just about her, but about the shifting soul of America itself. And as the cameras kept rolling, the spotlight was about to swing with brutal clarity onto Oprah's carefully polished image. For decades, Oprah Winfrey was untouchable. She wasn't just a television host, she was an institution, a cultural force who shaped how America talked about itself. Her show wasn't simply entertainment. It was confession, healing, empowerment, and spectacle all bound together. Millions of viewers didn't just watch Oprah, they trusted her. Politicians courted her approval, authors begged for her book club's golden seal, and celebrities feared, yet secretly craved, the intimacy of her interviews. She built an empire not only of wealth but of narrative dominance. On her stage, Oprah was always the one in control. She could coax tears out of the toughest celebrities, unravel guarded reputations, and elevate ordinary people into heroes. Her genius was her ability to project empathy while also wielding immense power. When she asked questions, they sounded gentle, but everyone knew she was guiding the story to her chosen destination. Rarely did anyone challenge her. Rarely did anyone dare. That aura became her armor. She could enter any room, Hollywood, politics, philanthropy, and instantly command respect. The Queen of Interviews wasn't just a nickname, it was reality. Even presidents treated her with deference. For much of America, Oprah was beyond reproach. But beneath that aura, contradictions lived quietly. Her rise had been built on extraordinary talent, yes, but also on careful alliances with corporate giants, media conglomerates, and political elites. She positioned herself as the everywoman, yet moved in circles far removed from the struggles she spotlighted. While she spoke about empowerment, she also learned the art of soft power control, guiding conversations in ways that made her seem benevolent while reinforcing her own dominance. Viewers rarely saw the steel beneath the smile, the deft interruptions that redirected uncomfortable answers, the pointed framing that gently boxed her guests into corners, the skillful use of silence to make others squirm while she appeared serene. Oprah wasn't just a host, she was a strategist. And for years, that strategy worked flawlessly. By the time she sat across from Jasmine Crockett, Oprah assumed she was once again stepping into familiar territory. Another strong personality, yes, but one who, like so many before her, would ultimately bend under the weight of Oprah's stagecraft. The narrative was supposed to be simple: Oprah, the seasoned guide, taming the fire of a passionate newcomer, the queen bestowing her wisdom, framing the story for millions at home. But Crockett was different. Unlike the Hollywood celebrities or guarded politicians Oprah had sparred with, Crockett wasn't protecting a brand. She was carrying a movement. She wasn't playing defense, she was playing offense, and that made her immune to the subtle traps Oprah had set for decades. This is what made the clash so shocking. Oprah was accustomed to people folding under her gaze, moderating their answers to please her, softening their convictions when pressed. She had mastered the art of putting guests in boxes they couldn't escape. The redeemed sinner, the humbled star, the grateful underdog. But when she tried to place Crockett in one of those boxes, the congresswoman simply refused to fit. For Oprah, that refusal was jarring. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not on her stage, not with her cameras rolling. And yet, in that moment of stunned silence after Crockett's cutting retort, Oprah's decades of control suddenly seemed fragile. Because the truth was this: Oprah's empire had been built in a media landscape where she was unchallenged. In an age before clips went viral in seconds, before hashtags rewrote reputations overnight, before audiences could dissect a pause or a smile frame by frame, Oprah's authority had been absolute. But now, in the age of social media, authority could vanish in the span of one sentence. And that was the storm she didn't see coming. When Crockett spoke with unapologetic clarity, when she reframed Oprah's attempt at control as proof of America's deeper silencing, the spell was broken. Viewers didn't see a queen mentoring a novice. They saw an establishment figure trying, and failing, to dim the light of a woman who refused to be diminished. For the first time, Oprah's usual playbook was about to fail her, and fail spectacularly. Jasmine Crockett didn't come from the kind of background that usually produces political power players. She wasn't groomed by legacy families or polished in Ivy League hallways with generations of influence behind her. She was born into the grit of real America. The America where bills pile up faster than paychecks, where opportunity feels like something you have to wrestle out of the hands of those who hoard it. From the beginning, she carried the story of resilience written into her bones. Her earliest years were defined not by privilege, but by struggle. She saw firsthand the ways systems ignored the very people they claimed to serve. Schools underfunded, neighborhoods overlooked, families working 2 or 3 jobs just to make rent. She didn't just read about inequality in a textbook. She lived it, and instead of letting those realities crush her spirit, Crockett decided they would fuel her fight. Education became her weapon. Determined to carve her own path, she pushed herself through the obstacles, earned her way into law, and quickly established a reputation as the kind of lawyer who didn't scare easily. While others shied away from controversial cases, Crockett leaned in, representing clients who were too often forgotten or discarded. She wasn't afraid of messy fights, because messy fights were where justice was hiding. That raw courage translated seamlessly when she entered politics. While most new voices in Congress arrived cautiously, eager to play nice and earn favor from the establishment, Crockett walked in with the same bluntness that had marked her legal career. She wasn't interested in watering down her beliefs to make others comfortable. She wasn't interested in the polite silence that so often cloaks corruption. She believed people had elected her not to blend in, but to break through, and people noticed. Quickly, within months, she developed a reputation as one of the most fearless truth-tellers on Capitol Hill. Her speeches were fiery, but they weren't reckless. They were sharp, precise, delivered with the kind of conviction that only comes from someone who has lived the consequences of the policies being debated. While colleagues wrapped their points in diplomatic niceties, Crockett cut through the fog. To some, it was abrasive, to others, it was refreshing. But to her supporters, especially immigrant families, marginalized communities, and young activists, it was electrifying. Finally, someone was saying what needed to be said without apology. That authenticity made her both a target and a rising star. Critics painted her as too radical, too unpolished, too loud. But every attack only made her base more loyal. They saw her willingness to take the hits as proof she was fighting for something real. Every insult hurled her way turned into fuel. Every attempt to silence her only amplified her voice. Crockett understood something her detractors didn't. America was changing. The old playbook of waiting politely for your turn, of softening truth until it was palatable to those in power, no longer resonated with a generation tired of waiting. She embodied that impatience. She made it visible. And for every establishment figure who rolled their eyes at her bluntness, there were thousands of young people cheering her on, believing she was proof that politics could finally look and sound like them. By the time she sat across from Oprah Winfrey, Crockett wasn't just another politician looking for airtime. She was carrying the weight of every underestimated voice in America. She represented the immigrant child told to quiet their accent, the working mother told to temper her anger, the young activist told to be realistic. She was, in every sense, a living rebuke to the culture of silence that had long propped up power. And what made her even more formidable was her preparation. Crockett wasn't reckless, she was deliberate. Behind the fiery words was a mind that studied, strategized, and anticipated. She knew how media narratives worked. She understood the traps laid for people like her. Traps that twisted passion into caricature, that turned boldness into sound bites stripped of context. So when she walked onto Oprah's stage, she didn't walk in as prey. She walked in ready. Ready for the loaded questions. Ready for the soft condescension. Ready for the attempt to cast her as noise instead of substance. What Oprah didn't realize in that moment was that Crockett had been preparing for battles like this her entire life. She had sparred with poverty, with injustice, with courts that didn't care, with opponents who underestimated her at every turn. A staged television interview, no matter how high profile, was simply another version of the same fight. And when Oprah thought she was cornering Crockett, she was actually setting the stage for her own unraveling. The studio was thick with tension, the kind that makes even seasoned audiences shift uneasily in their seats. Oprah leaned forward again, determined to reclaim the authority that had slipped from her grasp. Her tone sharpened, the warmth stripped away. "Congresswoman," she said, her voice edged with impatience, "passion is fine for rallies and headlines. But leadership requires discipline, compromise, and restraint. Do you honestly believe you can govern with all this fire?" The question wasn't a question at all. It was a verdict, a framing designed to box Jasmine Crockett into the stereotype of the impulsive agitator. The audience murmured, sensing the heat rising. Crockett didn't blink. She folded her hands calmly in her lap, her voice measured, even softer than before. A deliberate contrast to Oprah's tightening grip on the conversation. "Compromise has never built justice by itself," Crockett replied. "Compromise gave us decades of waiting while people suffered. Fire didn't break this country. Silence did." The room reacted with a low gasp, A ripple moved through the audience, a recognition that this was no ordinary back and forth. Crockett's words carried weight, not as performance, but as lived truth. Oprah shifted in her chair, her posture stiffening. She interrupted quickly, her tone rising a half step. But, without compromise, how do you build coalitions? How do you actually get anything done? You can't just shout people into agreement. For a beat, Crockett allowed the interruption to hang there. Then, with disarming calm, she answered, "I don't shout to make people agree with me. I speak so those ignored finally know they're not alone." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer. Oprah's smile tightened into something more like a grimace. She wasn't used to silence working against her. She wasn't used to a guest using patience as a weapon. She pressed harder, almost too hard. "So, what, you think you've got it all figured out at your age? That your way, the loud way, is better than the years of work people like me have put into building bridges?" It was meant as a rhetorical knockout, an appeal to seniority and legacy, but it landed differently. To the viewers at home, it sounded defensive, brittle. The audience caught it too, murmurs rolling through the room like distant thunder. Crockett, still composed, didn't take the bait. She leaned in slightly, her voice steady, almost tender. "I don't dismiss the bridges you built, I stand on them. But I refuse to let those bridges become cages. Respectability is not liberation. And if truth makes people uncomfortable, maybe that's the point." Applause broke out, not polite but urgent, insistent. The kind of applause that feels like a verdict. Oprah's hand twitched on her note cards. She tried to interject again, but the words tangled for just a second. A hesitation that the cameras caught in close-up. For the first time, the queen of interviews looked flustered. The duel of words had become something bigger than an exchange. It was generational friction made visible, establishment power colliding with insurgent authenticity. Oprah raised her voice, pushing back. Crockett lowered hers, making every word land like a hammer in the silence. Each sentence was a reversal, each pause a reminder that control was slipping from the veteran host's hands. The studio felt less like a talk show, and more like a courtroom, with an audience that knew it was witnessing history. Gasps, applause, sharp intakes of breath. The soundscape of a cultural earthquake. And then came the line. The moment that would be replayed across every social feed within hours. It happened in a heartbeat, though for those in the studio, it felt like time slowed to a crawl. Oprah had raised her voice, layered her legacy over her words, and leaned on the authority that had carried her through decades of interviews. But Jasmine Crockett did not shrink. She did not retreat. Instead, she drew a breath, steadied herself, and delivered the counterpunch that would echo far beyond the studio walls. Her voice was calm. Disarmingly calm. Not a hint of tremor, not the faintest note of defensiveness. She spoke as though she carried the weight of generations on her tongue, as though she understood that every syllable had to cut through the noise and carve itself into history. "You ask if my fire belongs in leadership." She began, her eyes locked on Oprah's, unblinking. "But let me tell you what doesn't belong. Silence doesn't belong. Respectability that asks us to swallow pain quietly doesn't belong. And waiting for permission from people who never planned to give it. That doesn't belong either." The audience erupted with a roar of applause, scattered shouts of agreement rising from the seats. Some clapped with hands above their heads. Others leaned forward, mouths open in astonishment at the sheer force of Crockett's clarity. But Crockett wasn't finished. She raised her hands slightly, not to silence them but to guide them back into the tension she was weaving. Her control of the moment was surgical. "You say compromise built bridges," she continued, her tone still even, every word measured like a surgeon's incision. "And yes, some bridges were built. But let's be honest. Those bridges only carried certain people across. Too many of us were left watching from the riverbank, told our time would come if we just behaved, if we just waited, if we just made ourselves smaller." The murmurs swelled again. A woman in the audience audibly whispered, "That's right." A man clapped once, sharply, then folded his arms with a grin, as if savoring the reversal. Crockett leaned back slightly, not triumphant, but deliberate. She let the words breathe. She allowed the silence to stretch long enough for Oprah's reaction to become the story. The cameras caught it, Oprah's lips pressed together, her jaw stiff, her eyes darting for the next angle of attack. But the authority wasn't hers anymore. It belonged entirely to the woman across from her. Then came the line that shattered the room. Crockett tilted her head, her voice dropping just enough to feel like both a rebuke and a revelation. "Noise," she said, almost softly, "is what you hear when people finally refuse to be ignored. And if my voice shakes the walls of power, then maybe the walls are too fragile to stand." The audience exploded. Applause thundered. People shot to their feet. Cheers broke the practiced decorum of a studio audience that had come expecting to watch Oprah, not witness her dethroning. The sound engineer's meters spiked red from the sheer volume of the eruption. And still, Crockett wasn't done. She leaned forward again, her words cutting through the ovation like a knife through fabric. "I didn't come here to be taught how to speak softer," she said. "I came here to remind this country that truth isn't always polite. And if truth makes power uncomfortable, that's not my problem. That's power's problem." It was surgical. It was devastating. It was the mic drop moment. Oprah tried to interject, her voice rising, but only to falter when the applause drowned her out. She smiled nervously, but the smile had lost its magic. For decades that smile had controlled rooms. Now it was an empty gesture, swallowed by the storm she could not contain. On social media, the clips were already flying. A teenager tweeted, "Crockett just checked Oprah OWNCW, this is history." A journalist wrote, "This might be the first time I've seen Oprah completely lose command of an interview." Hashtags sparked like wildfire, for Crockett clapback, per Oprah stunned, for Truthy's noise. In the studio, Crockett sat still, her hands folded, her expression serene. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat, didn't so much as shift in her chair. Her calm was the most devastating blow of all. Because while Oprah's composure cracked under the weight of the moment, Crockett radiated the dignity of someone who knew she had just shifted the ground beneath her opponent's feet. The duel was no longer balanced. Oprah's interruptions came faster now, her voice higher, the edges sharper. She asked Crockett if she worried about alienating moderates, if she feared being dismissed as too extreme. But the questions fell flat. They sounded less like the probing wisdom of a master interviewer, and more like the defensive jabs of someone trying to stop the bleeding. Crockett didn't take the bait. Instead, she pivoted with precision. Fighting for the unheard is extreme," she said. "Then maybe extremism is exactly what justice demands. Because the middle ground has never been where progress was born." Gasps, applause, silence. The cycle repeated like waves crashing against the shore. Each time Oprah tried to pull the tide back, Crockett sent it surging forward. It was the rarest kind of television. A reversal so complete that everyone in the room knew they'd be talking about it for years. Oprah, the cultural giant, visibly shaken. Crockett, the newcomer, unwavering, her every word striking chords far beyond the studio. And then, as the segment reached its crescendo, Crockett delivered the coup de grace. She leaned forward, her voice gentle, almost intimate, as though speaking directly to every viewer at home. "You built your legacy by helping people find their voices," she said, "but don't ask me to quiet mine just because it doesn't sound like yours." The audience froze. A stunned silence. No applause, no gasps. Just silence so heavy it rang like a bell. Oprah's eyes widened, her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment the woman who had always had the last word had none at all. Oprah, speechless. America, electrified. But the ripple effect was only just beginning. The moment the segment ended, before the cameras even stopped rolling, the internet had already taken control of the story. Clips flew across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at the speed of light. Within minutes, hashtags surged into trending territory, for Crockett clapback, for Oprah stunned, for Truthy's noise. Screens lit up across the country as millions replayed the scene of Oprah's frozen smile and Crockett's calm, devastating delivery. On TikTok, creators layered dramatic music over Crockett's "Truth isn't always polite" line, syncing the words to booming bass drops. Memes spread like wildfire. Oprah's stunned expression captured in screenshots, paired with captions like, "When you realize you're not the smartest one in the room," or, "That face when the student schools the teacher." Late night shows wasted no time. One host leaned back in his chair, imitating Oprah's smile faltering in slow motion, before replaying Crockett's mic drop line to a roaring studio audience. Another joked. Oprah asked for a masterclass, but Jasmine Crockett brought the whole university. Laughter cascaded through living rooms nationwide. Commentators, too, seized the moment. A CNN panel dissected Crockett's performance with the seriousness usually reserved for presidential debates. This wasn't just a soundbite. One analyst insisted, this was a generational torch, passing, Crockett showing she belongs at the table, and Oprah realizing her grip on the table might not be what it once was. MSNBC framed it as a cultural reckoning. For years, Oprah has symbolized authority, control, and safe space, a commentator explained. But Crockett brought raw truth, unfiltered passion, and the audience sided with her. That's a tectonic shift. Even celebrities chimed in. Viola Davis tweeted a simple gif of someone standing and clapping. Kerry Washington posted Crockett's line about noise and power, adding, "T.H. Ice. This is what leadership sounds like." Meanwhile, activists amplified the message, sharing the clip with captions like, "Representation with teeth. We've been waiting for this voice." But it wasn't just Crockett's supporters making noise. Oprah's defenders scrambled to spin the narrative, arguing that she had been ambushed, that the edit favored Crockett, that the internet was exaggerating. Yet their words rang hollow against the sheer virality of the moment. Every repost, every stitch, every meme tilted the balance further toward Crockett's triumph. And Crockett's stature. It exploded overnight. Cable news networks lined up requests for interviews. Hashtags began pairing her name with 2028. Online fundraisers in her support surged, donations flooding in from people who had never heard of her a week earlier, but now swore they'd found their champion. Meanwhile, Oprah's aura of untouchable dominance began to fray. Commentators whispered what once seemed unthinkable: had the queen of interviews finally met someone she couldn't command? Conservative outlets mocked her loss of control, while progressive circles dissected the deeper symbolism. The old guard being challenged, the establishment rattled by a fearless new voice. For days, the cultural ripple spread wider. TikTok users recreated the moment with parody skits. Instagram flooded with quote graphics of Crockett's lines, polished into slogans ready for protest signs. Podcasts devoted entire episodes to debating what the clash said about race, gender, and generational leadership. And through it all, the clip kept playing. Over and over, replayed like a national ritual. Oprah, her smile faltering, Crockett calm and resolute, the audience erupting. It was more than entertainment. It was validation. For millions who had felt unheard, silenced, or sidelined, seeing Crockett stare down a titan and not blink was a release. A reminder that authority could be questioned, that new voices could seize the mic and hold it. But as the fevered memes and hashtags raged, one question lingered just beneath the surface. Commentators hinted at it, audiences felt it, Crockett herself seemed to embody it. This wasn't just about a single viral moment. It was about something deeper, because the true meaning of this clash went far beyond Oprah and Crockett. It went to the very heart of what kind of voices America was ready to listen to next. In the days that followed, the clip was no longer just a viral spectacle. It became a parable. Commentators replayed it, activists quoted it, but what resonated most deeply was the moral clarity it carried. Crockett had not only defended herself against Oprah's attempt to command the moment, she had reframed the exchange into something far larger than one confrontation. When asked later about how it felt to spar with one of the most powerful media figures in the world, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't revel in the headlines, the memes, or the trending hashtags. She simply said, "Dignity always outlasts power." Those words struck like an anthem. They cut through the noise of punditry and satire, through the chatter of fans and critics alike. Dignity, not dominance, not legacy, not celebrity aura, was the force that endured. And in that single phrase, Crockett turned a clash into a lesson. Her calm on that stage had never been about scoring points. It was about holding the line for those whose stories were often interrupted, dismissed, or rewritten by those in positions of authority. Oprah represented performance, the polished surface of control. Crockett represented authenticity, raw, unflinching, unapologetic. The contrast couldn't have been sharper, and it was that contrast that left millions of viewers feeling seen. For too long, dignity had been confused with deference. With being polite, quiet, careful not to rock the boat, Crockett shattered that illusion. She showed that dignity is not silence. Dignity is not obedience. Dignity is truth spoken even when the room trembles in response. The moral crescendo of the moment was unmistakable. Justice is greater than arrogance. Authenticity is greater than performance. A voice rooted in lived struggle carries more weight than any well-rehearsed script. Crockett embodied that reality with every pause, every steady gaze, every measured rebuttal. And in doing so, she gave a lesson that rippled far beyond the studio walls. This was never just about two women on a stage. It was about every immigrant child told their story didn't matter, every worker dismissed for speaking up, every young leader underestimated because of age, accent, or background. Crockett's words, and the calm fire behind them, were proof that silenced voices could not only rise, they could stand eye to eye with giants and not flinch. The audience felt it. The nation felt it. What had started as a tense interview ended as a cultural turning point. A reminder that truth has a way of breaking through even the most polished veneer of authority. As Crockett's phrase circulated, dignity outlasting power, it became more than commentary. It became a rallying cry. People shared it as captions under their own stories, as signs at protests, as whispers in classrooms and community halls. The line was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever needed to believe that standing firm in truth mattered more than bowing to intimidation. And that was the ultimate revelation. Oprah's attempt to dominate the narrative had been flipped inside out. What she meant as control became the stage for liberation. What she hoped would showcase her authority instead revealed the enduring strength of authenticity. Crockett hadn't just survived the exchange. She had transformed it into proof of a universal law. Dignity always outlasts power. It was a lesson America didn't just watch on screen. It was a lesson America carried forward, etched into the memory of a single televised clash that turned into a generational anthem. And yet, as powerful as this resolution felt, the story wasn't finished. Because while the clip had become a touchstone, its ripple effects were only beginning to shape the future. In politics, in culture, and in the hearts of millions who now believed their voice could be next. Oprah was left stunned. But the audience, in the studio and across the nation, left awakened. What millions witnessed wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a moment that stripped away pretense and revealed the simple truth. No amount of polish or power can stand unchallenged when dignity walks into the room. Crockett's calm defiance proved that authenticity carries a resonance no stagecraft can match. Her words reminded us that truth doesn't tremble, even when the spotlight burns brightest. And in that unforgettable instant, the balance shifted. The queen of interviews lost her script, while a fearless new voice found hers. The lesson is clear: truth will always expose pretense, and dignity, spoken with courage, will always triumph over arrogance. Now it's your turn to carry this moment forward. Subscribe. Join the movement where dignity always triumphs over arrogance. Don't just watch history happen. Be part of the audience that demands it. Share. Send this to someone who's been underestimated, overlooked, or silenced, and remind them their voice has power. Comment: what does this clash teach you about standing for truth? Your words matter. Your story matters. And just like Crockett, you deserve to be heard. Because this wasn't just about Oprah and Jasmine. This was about all of us. About every moment we've been told to stay quiet, every time we've been underestimated, every time power tried to drown out dignity. Oprah was stunned. America was electrified, and the movement for fearless truth-telling. It's only getting louder.